Hello viewers, hello learners. My name is Tembele Matoti from St. John's College in Umtata, but I come to you today from the perspective of being a Deputy Chief Marker in the NSC exam. I'm actually interested in the exam approach to the way we study things. Today's lesson is about secondary economic activities, particularly focusing on the types of industries. I'll be covering this topic for your full understanding, and hopefully that is the way it works. Our approach today, and when you study for this lesson, if you want to understand it perfectly, please make sure you are able to define secondary economic activities. And also you know the types of industries, the different types of industries. That I'll be doing that today with you. But you must be able to define them. You must be able to describe what it does and how it looks like. And you must also be able to give examples of that industry and maybe the characteristics, because you need to be able to tell the difference between the other and the other. And also try, if you are able to integrate that information with map skills and then get a lot of question papers to work with so that you are familiar with how it will be asked in the exam. So get the approach right and make sure you've got all the points lined up nicely for your study, okay? Now, let us define the secondary economic sector, okay? This is a sector that is concerned with the processing of raw materials and the manufacturing of goods, okay? Now, this is very, very important because you are moving from the primary economic sector, where the concern was with the production of raw material from the earth. Now you're moving a level higher to the secondary economic sector, where we are dealing with the processing of raw materials and the manufacturing of those goods. Most importantly here, we are trying to convert the raw material to make it more useful to humans, okay? So you shape it, you process it, you make it usable, more beneficial to the economy and to the people of the country. Now, the places that you're looking at here, I'm going to clarify this well, is the factories and the industries. Maybe those two terms are a bit complicated. Let's start with the industries. The industries are a broad concept, industries, a broad concept about areas that are related to the manufacturing of the goods. But the factories are the actual points of manufacturing. They are the sites where the actual processing takes place. So the industries is very broad, but the factories is very, very small and pointed to the actual point of production. I want to look at the figure that we have on the screen, the picture. There you can see a big industry with chimneys, you can call them exhausts, that are blaring out white smoke, heavy pollution you can see there. And the industry itself is quite big, it covers a lot of land, okay? And it does look like there's a lot of machinery involved there. So that is actually the work we are going to be looking at, where the raw material is processed, the factories where this happens, that happens, but we're going to get the final product at the end of the day. I want to introduce this image to you. Wherever and whenever you see that image in your question paper, you must know that we are referring to factories, okay? So that image is universally accepted as referring to the factories, okay? Please note that, it's very important. Now, types of industries. Now, the initial classification, I'm saying initial because we're going to classify this further. The initial classification is for you to have light industries and heavy industries. I've put them side by side so that you can compare them, so that you are able to see out the similarities and the differences. Similarities, if any, and the differences, if any, because that also is a point of concern for the examination. You learners must be able to point out the differences between the light industries and the heavy industries, okay? So there are the photos already. You can see the one photo there with the industry that we dealt with before, okay? That we dealt with before. And now it's coming in under heavy industry. And you can see it's big. It's blaring out pollution, smoke, okay? And there's the light industry, the favorite beverage, international, transnational, Coca-Cola. That's a drink manufacturing company, okay? So we're going to look at those as the examples for today, but there are more examples that we will give for each of them, okay? So under light industries, you can look at the jewelry manufacturers, okay? Where you get your bracelets, your wristbands, your ankle bracelets, your clothes manufacturing, where you get your shirts, your textiles, your trousers, and you can also add in shoe manufacturing companies there. Food and beverages, there's Coca-Cola. Now you know what we mean. And bakeries where we get our staple food, the bread, okay? Bakeries, the buns, the rolls, the bread and all that, okay? What is notable at the moment is that the machinery used is light machinery. You may not know the difference as yet, but let's look at the heavy industry, okay? Here we have got examples like iron and steel industry, ISCO, ArcelorMittal, those that work with heavy raw materials, iron ore, coal, and things like that. Then power stations, where we produce our power. Motor vehicle factories, where you have your brands manufactured in South Africa, your Volvo, your Mercedes-Benz, your Audi cars, your VWs. These are heavy industries, and they use heavy machinery. So you can pick the difference already in this particular section where you have got examples, okay? The location, okay? Usually light industries are located near the CBD. I would like you to be bold enough, my dear learner, to say in the CBD. Let's just say near the CBD, as close as possible to the CBD. Hence, we are going to say you also find them in the zone of decay, okay? Immediately after the CBD, that's where you find them the most, okay? And in the more developed towns where there's proper town planning, you also have industrial estates where there's a designated area fenced off nicely, infrastructure supplied. And in those estates, you get a lot of industries operating within that. And the raw material here is cheaper to transport, meaning you need a lighter raw material sometimes, and it is cheaper and easier to transport, okay? So you need, for example, you need existing infrastructure, that is road networks. So you just drive into the zone of decay, you load, or you drop off the raw material that you have. You don't need special adaptations to the infrastructure. You use existing infrastructure and use existing power supply. Now let's move on to heavy industries, okay? These are usually in the outskirts of the city. Now, this is occasionally in the area of settlement geography, where you talk about the rural-urban fringe, where there's mixed land use, the rural-urban fringe, and sometimes straight away in the rural areas, okay? And I'll explain that because in the rural areas, sometimes you've got a lot of focus on primary economic activities. So that is where you get the raw material. Take, for example, a rural area where there's forestry, okay? And you are going to have a heavy industry right inside the forest, and you call that a sawmill, to be able to be nearer to the raw material, okay? Where the raw material can be sourced or obtained, okay? Now, in this scenario, you'll find that if the industry was far away far away from the raw material. Very expensive to transport logs of wood to the industry. So it's cheaper if you put the industry right near the raw material. If it's a sawmill, right in the forest, okay? If it is a smeltering company, put it as close as possible to the mining area, closer to the raw material. On that point, okay, remember there's something we're going to go to just down the lesson where we're going to talk about raw material orientated industries. And we're going to talk about market orientated industries. Keep that in mind, okay? The raw material in light industries, it can be small, very light in weight as well. Hence, you can transport it via the trucks into the area that is urban using the normal roads, the existing infrastructure. It may also be partially processed. So when it gets to the actual light industry, it is going to get to the next level of processing. So things are pretty simple to do there. It's very, very light, and the product is also light in weight. Hence, you bring in the raw material with trucking, and you bring it out with trucking as well. No need for big time transport like trains and harbors and all that, okay, for your shipment. So it is pretty easy to move. However, in the heavy industry, there is large and bulky raw material. Remember the example about the logs, the trees in the forestry, okay? And the trees are not processed. So it has just tree felling, the trees come down, and the raw material that you need is exactly that, okay? And the product is also likely to be large and bulky. So you will process it, but you will have timber coming out of that, and you still need trucks to transport the timber. So you need specialized transport to load those timber planks that you need to move. However, as a concept, please understand that those timber planks or wood will still be lighter compared to the wood logs that were harvested. So the product loses weight a bit compared to the raw material. Let's look at the land requirements. Okay? Remember, the light industry is situated closer to the CBD, okay? Closer to the CBD. So it does not have specific requirements for land. It actually uses relatively small space. However, the heavy industries need large land, and often to make it cheaper to work with, flat land. Now, cheaper land will always be in the rural urban fringe or in the rural areas, okay? So this matches nicely. You interweave this, okay? You get the location, and you get the topography, and you get the cost of the land, okay? Large area, flat land, cheaper land, rural urban fringe, rural areas, okay? And then we have already touched on the infrastructure, but with heavy industries, you need major roads, particularly railways. And there is water and power supply. But let's add on another concept here, okay? The power must be reliable, okay? Reliable power supply. So in this case, you start thinking about what disadvantage it might be to have load shedding, okay? So we need reliable power supply, not just power supply, okay? Now, we started off with this. When we looked at that, you see the smoke coming out of the chimneys there. Heavy industries are also heavy on pollution. And pollution can be classified into three: the air pollution, as seen on the image, the noise pollution because of the heavy machines that are working there, and the water pollution, that is the effluent that is usually deposited into the nearby rivers. That's a problem. It's an environmental problem. It's a challenge. So going into the exam, think about this approach from the examiner. Maybe you may be requested to identify the problems and suggest possible solutions. So think about that, okay? Let's move on to the next slide, where we try to introduce the map integration. And we're going to be very, very simple here. You have the key here, and we want to look at this particular point where we're looking at industries, okay? So we'll summarize what we said before, but trying to find its space in a map, okay? So look at that, okay? Industries, and there's heavy industry, okay? Now, look at this. There's the CBD, okay? And the heavy industry is located far away from the CBD, in the outskirts, in the rural areas where the land is flat, large, and cheap, okay? So that's your heavy industry, far from the CBD. Now look at where I'm pointing at now, very, very close to the CBD, okay? And that's the light industry. Remember we said you can find it closer to the zone of decay, okay? The zone of decay, immediately after the CBD. And these are the light industries closer to the CBD. Remember, we are dealing here with the location factors of heavy and light industries. Heavy industries in the rural fringe, rural urban fringe, and the outskirts, and light industries closer to the CBD. There we go. Now we're coming to the types of industries. Quite simplified, everything put together to make it easy to follow, okay? Raw material oriented industries, we've spoken about that before, okay? These are located closer to the raw materials, okay? Remember the sawmill, remember the tree logs, cutting down and all that, and the industry being right near the forest to be able to process it. So the raw material is bulky and expensive to transport. So it makes sense to bring it closer. Examples were the iron and steel industries like ArcelorMittal and all the industries like ISCO, that was the iron and steel. Sugar milling, remember sugarcane, sugar is your chosen product, and also the sawmills, as I've given example. And these are raw material oriented industries, usually heavy industries. Let's go to market oriented industries. These are located closer to the people who are going to be buying, the market, okay? The people who are going to be buying. And the product usually has a very short shelf life, meaning it is perishable. It is quick to go bad, okay? So your vegetables, your milk products, they are going to have very, very short shelf life, okay? So that's where you get your fresh produce and your bakeries, baked food. So in essence, your raw material oriented industries are your heavy industries, and your market oriented industries are your light industries, okay? Let's move on to the bridge industries. Bridge industries are located between the raw material and the market. So this is where the raw material comes in, it's bulky, it's big, and then it gets broken down to smaller pieces. And then it is easier to transport to the market where it is needed the most. So the bulk is broken down, break off bulk industry, okay? For example, the oil refinery, where oil comes in as crude oil, it is processed, and then the products from that are loaded onto trucks, and then they are transported to the various areas where the products are needed the most. So the oil refinery becomes a very good example of the break of bulk industry or a bridge industry, bridge between the raw material and the market, okay? And then we move on to the most contentious of the types of industries, where I would like you learners to listen very carefully, okay? The footloose industry. It can be located anywhere. It can be either closer to the market or closer to the raw material. That is not the breaking point of this topic here. What is most important here is these are industries that are assisted by improved technology. A very good example is where you manufacture software, where you manufacture hardware for computers, and where you do research and design, and then you do modeling, and you produce those particular things that you modeled. Now, the most important thing here is these are high skill people who are working on these industries. Now, remember at the end of the day, which is the key to this, having high skills, producing all these high-tech gadgets and all that, and producing all these models that we have researched and designed, you will still need the transport networks. So this is the key here. You need the transport networks to make the footloose industry work. And that is key because you see it differentiates it from the next one, which is ubiquitous industries. Ubiquitous industries. Whichever way you pronounce it is not important to me, but let's write it the same way. But we call it ubiquitous industries, okay? Now, what happens here? It is located anywhere, okay? Anywhere, and it can also be found almost everywhere, okay? It provides services 24/7, 365, meaning in every day, every minute, every hour, every month, right throughout the year, you get these services, okay? Very good examples are your telecommunications, your companies, reputable companies that provide your network services, like your Telcom, your Vodacom, your MTN, and any other company that I haven't mentioned, that provides you with your airtime, your data, your connectivity, your Wi-Fi, and all that. And these are inseparable from the market. People need them wherever they are. Now, this one, remember the key, it needs no transport network, okay? You only need connectivity to make it work, okay? So your footloose industries are transport dependent. However, your ubiquitous industries don't need any transport, okay? They are networks, they provide services. Now let us move. Here I'm going to focus only on one question because I want to pick on what we need, okay? Look at question 143. That's the one I'm going to look at. Let's look at the question paper, September 2024, which is fairly recent, okay? And we've got a picture here, a sketch, sorry, that has got a few photographs in them. And we are more focused on that symbol. Remember I said it's a universally accepted symbol for factories. And that shows you an industrial area. And then the question says, account for land use zone B being located on the outskirts. Remember we said industries being on the outskirts are heavy industries. And you can see the heavy machinery there, the pollution coming out of the chimneys. And heavy industries need large land, flat land, cheap land. On the outskirts, there we go, on the outskirts, meaning on the rural urban fringe, on the outskirts. So what is your answer there? They need large land, they need flat land, they need cheap land. So you only need two of those to be able to get 4 marks. That one is sorted out. Let's move on to the next one, okay? And here you have got, from the same question paper, 2 images, oil refinery and a bakery. And you are asked to work through 221 to 228, okay? Break of bulk industry, and I've dealt with that, where the oil comes in shipments, processed, broken down, and then transported in smaller quantities to the market. So that is obviously the oil refinery, okay? Large scale mass production, heavy industry, that is the oil refinery, okay? Occupies a small area of land, very small area of land. That's a light industry. So that's a bakery, okay? Located on the urban periphery, on the outskirts, rural urban fringe, rural areas, large land, flat land, cheap land. That is the oil refinery, heavy industries, market orientated, must get to the people who need it as fresh as it can be. That is the bakery, okay? Relies on road transportation, existing networks, no special adaptations. That is the bakery, okay? Associated with low levels of pollution. Remember, light industries have got low levels of pollution. So that is a bakery. Heavy industries, look at that. Pollution, smoke coming out, heavy stuff. So here we are looking at the bakery. Requires large amounts of energy and water. That is the oil refinery. Remember, we said not only energy, but reliable power supply. That even said, think about the question of load shedding as a disadvantage. Okay? Now, in conclusion, my dear learners, please let's go back to where we started. You have to be able to define the economic industries. You've got to be able to look at the types of industries and define them, describe them, give examples, and characterize it, then integrate that with maps, which we did to some extent today. And we have also done the question papers. Please get more question papers so that we are familiar with how we want it in the exams. And practice, practice, practice makes perfect. Dear learners, we have come to the end of our lesson today. You can leave your questions and comments. And don't forget to leave the name of your school so that we are able to give shout outs. Please share, recommend, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, ECDOE Broadcast Studio. Thank you for watching. See you next lesson. Remember, the warmer the blankets, the colder the future. Thank you very much. Good luck for the exams.